That's it. The best to get the best in first. Wow.
Good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to everyone this morning for our Armistice lecture on what is a bit of a momentous morning for global politics following the American election yesterday. A At Combat Stress, our work focuses on the aftermath of global conflict and the impact of PTSD on those who have fought and their families. So for us, looking forward and understanding what may come next is absolutely crucial. So we are very pleased to welcome this morning 3 war correspondents: Fergal Keane, Christina Lamb OBE, and Jane Corbin. And to lead the discussion, we are also very pleased to welcome Professor Sir Simon Wesley. Simon is Director of the King's College Centre for Military Mental Health Research and also a Vice President of Combat Stress. So over to Simon.
Some big news this morning. You may have missed it, but a new Mental Health Act entered Parliament this morning. I know that because I wrote it. And there's a new clause in it that you may not have picked up because I noticed the media were a little bit distracted and didn't cover it. But this is the clause to give a psychiatrist the power to detain anyone for 1 week if their mobile phone goes off during a lecture. So I am a psychiatrist, so I have that power. So I'm just warning you as to what will happen under the new powers, okay? Right then, so now we've got that clear. And by the way, it is true, it is this morning, it's happened. I mean, I wrote a piece for the Times yesterday, and the Department of Health sent it in, and the Times told the Department of Health press office, their press officer, do you know what's happening tomorrow? And he said, what? And they said, well, we don't have any space. You'll find out. I've literally not made that out. That's one of our press officers. Unbelievable. Right then, so we've got a wonderful panel here today. So in no particular order, first of all, Christina Lamb, who's Chief Foreign Correspondent of the Sunday Times.
And I should apologise. I'm mainlining coffee because I was watching something all night and I am really stressed.
I think it's the coffee, isn't it? No, okay, yeah. Well, that's true. But I noticed you're an honorary fellow of University College Oxford. So am I. So we've got something in common. That's rather good. You read PPE. I don't have that in common. But you'll be delighted to know you have that in common with David Cameron, Richie Sunak, Matt Hancock, Liz Truss, Anne Widdecombe, and Toby Young. I know it's good. So, what an elite bunch that you really are. God, done more damage to the British society than any other degree, I think. You've won multiple awards, 18 according to the list, but you haven't updated your most recent one because a few weeks ago you were here in RUSI and you received their top award, the Chesney Gold Medal. So many congratulations. That's brilliant. I'm genuinely impressed. Okay, I'm also equally impressed. Moving on next to Fergal Keane. Fergal, you've got an OB as well, haven't you? Yeah, they forgot that, but yeah, well, maybe you've sent it back or something. I don't know, but you do. I think you do. You've also won a terrifying number of awards. You won the Royal Television Society Reporter of the Year, but also the Sony Radio Award in the same year, and lots more. You written on the Troubles, South Africa, Rwanda, where everything for you changed. But I did notice recently one particular comment you gave. You were interviewed by the Church Times, very religious, obviously. Well, it wouldn't have to be, but it is very religious. And you channeled your inner Derry girl by making, I thought, a very provocative comment. You said that Protestant discos are better than Catholic. And that is very provocative. I think it's untrue, but
you haven't been to the parish priest disco in Ardmore, County Waterford in 1976.
Not in 76, no, but I was there the year after. Okay. And finally, last but not least, Jane Corbin, 3 times winner of the Royal Television Award, just 100 panoramas to her name. And I know you quite well, and you've just done a piece for the Panorama called October the 7th Revisited, a year on, which is on all good iPlayers at the moment.
Yep.
And this is absolutely true. We were in Greece together just 3-4 weeks ago, and you were editing it on the beach with a glass of ouzo in your hand.
This is not how it usually is.
And doing the voiceover.
Changing some comments.
That's a real professional. Okay, so where do we start? Well, I mean, we've got to start. We've got no choice, folks. We've got no choice. It's a slow news day, and we're going to have to say. So I'm going to start, I think, with you, Christina, because you did a piece. The camera's sitting exactly where Hillary is now. Where is Hillary? I'll take my glasses off. It is you. Good. And thank you very much for sponsoring this, by the way. That's really good. And you said that we seem to be living in a period of history where there seem to be more wars than ever before. Does today's news make that more or less likely?
Actually, I was thinking about this morning. The funny thing is, some of my friends in Afghanistan and Gaza are happy with the result because they feel that nothing could be worse than Biden. Also, some Ukrainians feel that they've been kind of abandoned anyway, so it doesn't make a lot of difference. When Trump won before, I was terrified that he was going to start wars. And in the end, he didn't actually. But it was a very different situation because then he didn't really expect to win. He didn't know how things worked. The checks and balances worked. This time, he's, you know, may as well be a dictator. He's got everything. He's got the Supreme Court, he's got Congress, he's got Senate, and he's got the popular vote. So he really could do what he liked, which is a scary prospect. And obviously some of the comments he's made are quite alarming. So I don't know.
So you're not
worse.
optimistic by the sound of it.
Well, some of the things, I mean, I kind of agree with, like, Afghanistan can't be worse than it is at the moment for women. I mean, unless the Taliban literally say, women, there's not enough oxygen for you and you need to just stop breathing. But, you know, they're stopped from doing anything, right? Even speaking to each other.
Yeah.
So that can't really be worse. So maybe his friend Abdul, who he referred to in the debate, nobody knows who Abdul is, but the Taliban leader, perhaps he could, you know, exert some pressure that everyone else has failed to do so far. Netanyahu obviously has been doing what he likes really anyway, but will feel now liberated. I mean, you just have to look at Twitter or X this morning to see the kind of people that are very warmly congratulating Trump, and those are, you know, mostly the Bolsonaros, the Netanyahu. I suppose my biggest fear is that it emboldens dictators.
Orban was enthusiastic, I think, is Orban.
Yeah, Orban was very enthusiastic as well, and Mnangagwa in Zimbabwe.
Okay. Also, Keir Starmer was as well, to be fair. So lots of lots of leaders did. So not a good lookout, but just, I mean, you two have both been in the Ukraine very recently. And I was slightly surprised what you said. I would have thought they were having kittens in Kiev at the moment.
I think they feel already that they're not, you know, they're not getting what they need. If we were really committed to Ukraine winning this war, we would be giving a lot more. Oh, is this not? Okay.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the situation in Ukraine is bleak. When
Well, the mic's not working.
When Zelensky went into Russia, into Kursk region, and at the time, you know, there was a lot of enthusiasm about that. That seems to have been a strategic error, because he thought that that would mean Putin would take his troops away from the east, and he did not do that. And in fact, to use the fact that Zelensky's best troops have been taken away, and now the Russians have taken more land on that front line in the east in the last 3 months than they have in the last year.
Yeah.
So it's not a good situation. And when I was there recently, you know, everybody is in fear of these mobilization gangs. Honestly, I didn't hear a good word about Zelensky this time. People are not happy.
These are kind of press gangs.
Yeah, because they don't have, it's not just that they don't have enough weapons, they don't have enough manpower.
No. Okay, Jane, and then Fergal.
Well, I think, is this working? Yeah.
Yep.
I think this morning, Trump said, in the 4 years that I was president, there was only one war against ISIS, which we won. They said I would start wars, and I stopped wars. So he said that this morning. And yes, of course, I think we're all worried about what he might do, but he is definitely isolationist, not interventionist. He believes that too much money has been spent on foreign adventures. He wants to put a stop to it. The trouble is he has no plan for how to do that. So in the Middle East, for example, he's boasted of stopping the war within a day. The same with Ukraine. I mean, we all know that these are completely ridiculous statements. So I think it remains to be seen what he says. But I personally don't think that he will be in favor of starting more wars, which was your question. I think he will do his best to to draw back. And, you know, it's the economy stupid, isn't it? And it's the border and it's immigration for Trump. So I think that perhaps we shouldn't be as pessimistic as we might be. But I do think that if I was Zelensky this morning, I would be extremely worried, because he will obviously push for Ukraine to take a position which gives land to Russia. The worry for me, and Christina mentioned about no checks and balances, in his first term, he had his advisors. They were people that, by and large, some of them, people like Kelly and others, knew what they were doing. He doesn't have those people anymore. He will be untrammeled and uncontrolled. And we're going to see people that will become very important to him, people like Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk has very strong opinions about what should happen internationally and has come up with all sorts of ridiculous notions. You know, let's just sort things out with the Chinese, where he has his Tesla factories. Let's just sort things out with Ukrainians to the detriment of the Ukrainians. So my worry is that people like Elon Musk will have a very big say in what happens in foreign affairs. And my other concern is what will happen with Putin. Nobody knows, but it appears that Trump is in some way beholden or in hock to Putin or afraid of him. There's always talk, of course, since 2016 about compromat. You know, what does Putin have? What does Putin's intelligence services have on Trump and his personal habits and his business relations with Russian oligarchs? So I would be concerned about Musk, and I would be concerned about Putin as much as I would be, and their influence and what does and doesn't happen with regard to them and their control over situations, as I would be as to whether Trump will start new wars or manage to stop the old ones.
Okay, Fergus, you've got your long face on.
I do, because I don't think the issue is about Trump starting wars. There are some conflicts we can't avoid, some conflicts we must not avoid, if we are to try and preserve the territorial integrity of Western Europe, if we're to try and preserve the territorial integrity of Taiwan. Now, if you're up against an isolationist American prime minister who has no clue on earth about how the world really works, who believes that you can actually be isolationist, then we're in deep trouble. What happens if Putin forces, which I suspect is what's going to happen in the next year or so, he forces, with Trump's support, an unjust deal, which takes away a large portion of Ukrainian territory, and then begins to eye Moldova, and then begins to look at the Baltics? Don't tell yourselves that this isn't something that can't happen. There's a rather wonderful phrase, I don't know whose it is, but it talked about, you know, a moment when history slips its leash. We're in that moment where the unthinkable is now really possible. And therefore, this is, you know, it's the most worrying morning that I can remember in my career as a journalist, without a shadow of a doubt.
Christine, do you want to come back on that? I mean, no one's feeling particularly optimistic, but
No, I agree. I mean, it's very depressing.
yeah, okay.
I mean, the other thing I would say is that I spoke about Trump not having a strategic vision. No American president has had a long-term strategic vision since George W. Bush. I'm not arguing for his vision, by the way, okay? But I'm just saying the neocons had an idea and a plan, okay? It created an awful lot of trouble. But, you know, everybody has been reactive. And the one thing you can say, looking at Putin, looking at Xi in China, is that they do have a plan. And that plan is about ending, you know, what they perceive as American hegemony.
Yeah.
And establishing their dominance in their spheres. So for the Chinese, that is the Asia Pacific region, and for Putin, right across Eastern Europe. And they're patient. They're patient. We're so bound into it's the nature of modern democracies, but this, you know, constant reaction to what a politician says or events, and we're so busy, we're so tied up with all of that. There is no really coherent long-term strategic planning.
I'm surprised none of you mentioned NATO.
Yeah, well, NATO, of course, that's the big question. And of course, Trump, again, in his first term, was very outspoken about NATO and pushed really for the share of defense spending amongst NATO members to go up. And actually, the reaction in some NATO countries was to push up spending. So he got what he wanted in a way. But yeah, he would like to obviously come out of NATO. And I think actually the French and German defense ministers are meeting in a few hours' time. So obviously people are starting to talk about what that could mean for Europe. Yeah, I think it is very worrying. And for the Baltic states, Fergal mentions the Baltic states, but of course they are the most exposed. They feel the most exposed. And under Article 5, if, you know, see there was any action, everybody would be bound to join in. So yeah, I think that NATO, there'll be a lot of meetings going on around Europe in the next few days on that front. To what end, I'm not sure. But, you know, maybe NATO is a thought too far for him now if the economy and immigration and the border are what will exercise him first of all. Well, obviously we've got a few months interim period anyway until he comes in January. But I think NATO, yes, is going to have to make some plans.
Would that be a bad thing though? I mean, Lithuania's doubled its defense expenditure. I mean, admittedly, that's from very small to still small, but it has done.
Yeah, I think
It's what I've said.
probably, I mean, I don't know, Britain, of course, is one of the countries that does have the higher level of expenditure on defense. Perhaps it's no bad thing, but the issue is that our systems and our armies, and, you know, people here who are more expert on this than I am, are all connected, you know, Russian doctrines, arms, you know, joint programs. I don't quite know what happens to those. It's not just about the umbrella, the defense umbrella and the nuclear umbrella. It's also about the integrated systems that we have and our armies have as well in Europe with North America.
Okay. Now, obviously, we're in RUSI, where this is the kind of talk that goes on all the time. So I do want to switch a little bit as well to some other topics as well, and then we'll probably come back to that. But you're here because you're all leading foreign correspondents, war correspondents, whatever. And I'm certainly interested. Why do what is it that made you choose this particular line of business and stay in it? So can we start with you, Fergal? I mean, we know your background meant that you were certain to be a journalist, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I came from a family of great talkers
Yes.
and notice seekers, and that stood me in good stead. Yeah, I mean, my family background is of playwrights and actors and writers, and it was always in the air. And then a love of history combined, and I think just as I wanted adventure.
I mean, I couldn't see you becoming a gardening correspondent, for example. I don't think that would work
Not
very
yet.
well.
Not sure. The way the BBC is going, you wouldn't. I might be glad of
I
it.
didn't mean gardening
They'd
leave.
put me out to garden.
Still working.
But yes, I mean, and I think above all, a deep curiosity about the world. I'm fascinated by people. My kids always tease me, you know, that if we're anywhere, I will say to someone, "Where are you from?" and want to know their story. And that's just organic. It's in me, that. And I think as well, it's a whole mix of motives. But when you get there and you get to the war zones and people start patting you on the back and telling you how great you are and giving you prizes, it's incredibly seductive, addictive. No, it is.
Yeah.
So I mean, of course, bearing witness is a huge part of it. But I'm wary of being too pious about that, because I also know a large number of foreign correspondents, including myself, for whom that is a motive, but by no means the only one. You know, by no means the only one. We love being famous. We love being patted on the back and told we're great.
Yes. Well,
I'm off it. I'm off it. And I think it's better to be honest about it, because we're, you know, as humans, of course, our motives are mixed. We're driven by many things. And yes, moral courage is part of it. Ambition is part of it. Caring about other human beings is part of it. Curiosity. These are all my motives.
We'll come to the cost in a minute, but first of all, Jane, then do you tell I mean, you're from a political family, aren't you?
Well, on my mother's side, but on my father's side, my father was a test pilot in the war and then went to Africa and flew planes and met my mother, who was a nurse in the middle of nowhere. And so I came from a family that lived abroad and traveled abroad, and very sort of unconventional upbringing. So for me, travel and being in very far-flung places was kind of part of my childhood. And I think that is probably what influenced me in the choice of career that I made. And luck plays a huge part, because there's lots of people who start out thinking they'd love to end up as a foreign correspondent or a war correspondent, and they absolutely don't make it. So the stars have got to be in the right place. You've got to, right place, right time to forge your way through. And I love doing it, and I still love doing it, and I've been doing it for far too long. And Fergal is right. It is seductive. It's it's addictive. And I don't know. Simon will know about this because he's the expert on the brain. But there must be something. There are serotonins or something that go on there. And when you're on the ground and adrenaline and you're in dangerous and difficult situations, it is addictive. And the other thing I would say is the fantastic sense of camaraderie that we all have. I don't know, Christina, possibly less because you're more of a print journalist, but we who work in TV and film and radio, we're in a team. And, you really rely particularly on your local fixers and your local experts who basically underpin what we do, and they don't get enough thanks and praise for it. And the sense of camaraderie and being in a team, being in danger and coming out of it and, having that drink at the end of the day, which is probably the best thing about it. That is really, really important. And that's, I think, why we keep doing it.
The German TV correspondent in London this morning has tweeted about 6 a.m. I'm off to the pub. Which one's open? Who wants to join me? And about 500 people apparently have turned up. So there you are. Okay, Christina.
So, well, my dad was an accounts clerk and my mum was a lab assistant. So, and they didn't particularly read newspapers. So there was nothing that led me towards journalism, but I always loved writing. And also as a creature of libraries, we used to go to the library every Saturday and borrow lots of books. And I think I read lots of books about exciting things happening in the rest of the world and thought that our kind of suburban life in South London was very dull in comparison. So I always wanted to travel and write. Journalism was by accident because somebody at university invited me to a cheese and wine party for free cheese and wine, and it happened to be for the university newspaper. And I heard all the people there talking about it, and I thought, actually, I'm really curious about people, and I like writing, so I joined and ended up editing it. But I still really wanted to write novels. So when I left university, my idea was to go and live abroad, have some adventures and write my great novel. But through a sort of chain of circumstances, I interned for a couple of weeks at the Financial Times and got to interview Benazir Bhutto. And she was living here in London in exile at the time. And so that was like my first big story. And the day I interviewed her was the day she announced her engagement to Asif Ali Zardari. So it was actually a news story. So she then went back to Pakistan. I ended up as a trainee at Central TV, although I never wanted to go into TV. I always wanted to write. And one day I came home from work and there was this most beautiful gold inscribed invitation on my mat, which was to Benazir's wedding in Pakistan. So I went to Pakistan and it was an amazing introduction to the country. If you've been to South Asian weddings, you know they're very colorful, they go on for a long time. Benazir being who she was, it was to me like something out of sort of Arabian Nights. It was spectacular, but also it was very political. Every night she had these gatherings with her political colleagues about how to try and take on Pakistan's military dictator, General Zia. So I was fascinated and couldn't really imagine coming back to Birmingham and covering local news. So I gave him my notice and went to live in Pakistan. But I went to talk to foreign editors about freelancing for them and nobody was interested. They all said General Zia has been in power 11.5 years. Nothing's going to change. And I was like, no, but Benazir is going to topple him. But then some of them said, we are interested in Afghanistan because at that time, so this is the late 80s, it was under Soviet occupation. So because of that, I ended up going to live in Peshawar. And I had read a lot of Rudyard Kipling and Kim. And Peshawar seemed to be exactly as Kipling described it. And started traveling in and out of Afghanistan with the Mujahideen and fell in love with Afghanistan. So that's sort of how I ended up covering war. I never thought about it, never set out to do it. And I've sort of done it ever since. And I think partly it's because we don't seem very good at ending wars. So all the things I cover are still a mess. So Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Zimbabwe, none of these things have got resolved really. So, and they become after a while more than a story to you because you have a lot of friends there. I am quite idealistic. I do believe, rightly or wrongly, that if we expose injustice, that hopefully somebody will see that and do something about it. And so that is important. And I care very deeply about what happens to women and children in wars. So I try and expose as much as possible the civilian cost, and in particular the women.
And before anyone gets the impression that it's only the TV journalists who run risks, that wasn't what you actually said, Jane, but yeah, I know. No, I know, but I made
No,
that up.
everybody
Just,
knows.
just to segue into saying you were present when Benazir was killed.
Not when she was killed. I was on her bus when it was blown up,
Oh,
which was the biggest ever bomb in Pakistan. 150 people were killed, which was pretty scary. Yeah, that was it was horrible. And actually, I almost decided not to do this anymore then, because that came in that same year. I'd been ambushed by the Taliban. I'd been in a hotel that was suicide bombed, and then I was in Benazir's bus when it was blown up. So all those three things happened within a year. And I think foreign war correspondents are quite superstitious, and I started to feel like my luck had run out. So I did think about giving up. And the reason that I didn't was when I came back from being on that bus when it was blown up, I came back here, and the night I got back, I went to a dinner for an incredibly brave Zimbabwean lawyer called Beatrice Matetwa, who was being honored by the Bar Association, and I know her quite well. And I said to her, you know, Beatrice, I'm thinking about giving this up because these bad things have happened, but also I feel like I write all this stuff and it doesn't make any difference. And Zimbabwe was a particular case because, you know, we were constantly going there undercover, writing about all the atrocities that Mugabe was carrying out. We were putting people at risk by them speaking to us, and then nothing happened. So she said to me, she said, Christina, do you know what? If people like you don't write about what people like me are doing, then what's the point of what we're doing? And that really made me think, yeah, maybe there is a point in documenting all of this so nobody can say afterwards that they didn't know.
Now, I'm going to move on in a minute to talking a little bit more about what combat stress doing, in other words, the kind of psychological effects of war and things like that. But let's have a couple of questions then on what we've been talking about so far before we move on to some other issues. You don't have to, you don't want to, but has anyone got a, yeah, okay. Say who you are, just so we know. I think, yeah, just shout, okay? You're all capable of doing that.
We often hear the phrase "an era of post-truth," and it seems that certain figures like Donald Trump are perfect to scandal. What do you see as the impact of that role of professional journalism? Do you see that changing?
You want to speak that one up? Jane?
Yeah, and it's a real challenge for us, you know, and the BBC is particularly, I can speak to the BBC and so can Fergal. We spend a lot of time now trying to figure out how we combat fake news or, you know, post-truth. It exercises us a lot. But, you know, at the end of the day, on the positive side, when polls are done, they still show that people regard the BBC, for example, and I'm sure, you know, newspapers are broadsheets as well, as authoritative, and they would believe what we say. But it is a real problem for us, especially with social media. The social media is so instantaneous that half-truths, complete lies, etc., can be spread. And I think the only answer is just to keep doing what we do, and keep pointing out why something is wrong, or why something is false, or why something speaks to a certain agenda. but the challenges are enormous. And the BBC set up a whole department called BBC Verify, what you've probably heard it referred to on the news and things, which their job is literally to use all the skills that we have, the open source intelligence to interrogate video, to interrogate posts, to actually look at what is happening to, the sources of our information, to pinpoint where they're accurate, to try to put ballast behind our claims to be telling you what's true, rather than those who would spread fake or false news. But it is an enormous challenge. It really is one of the biggest challenges we've ever faced.
I mean, I think if I can speak positively, one of the good things about social media that has emerged is a whole kind of armies of people on different continents who call out disinformation, who call out shoddy journalism. I remember when I started, I could go to anywhere in Africa, and if I was minded to, I wasn't, needless to say, but if I was minded to, I could write whatever I liked about somebody's country, and quoting various sources, who might or might not exist. And there was a lot of that went on. And nowadays, you try to do that, you'll be called out very quickly, because people in those countries, human rights lawyers, citizen journalists, have access to what we do in a way they never did. Our audience is now global. Every one of us sitting here knows that the experience of that. And so it'll be picked up very quickly. Now, the other side of that, of course, is you become the target of armies of trolls who don't like what you are writing, who are governed perhaps by their own political agenda or directed by a state intelligence agency. You've people fanatically keen to take offense at anything and try and bully you. Anyone who deals with, for example, the sort of broader Middle East knows exactly what's that like, or what that is like. So it's a difficult balance. Personally, when I'm on stories like that, I switch off Twitter. I just don't read it, because I don't want the kind of pressures from different sides, just one side, from different sides. I switch off because I don't want to let that into my head to distract my judgment.
Okay, I'm having a left-wing bias at the moment, but we'll switch to the right wing in a minute, as everyone else has. So, sir, yep.
But just back to Pakistan, less than a week ago, we've been driven through for Hindi, and our local guide said this is where Benazir was murdered. And it's exactly the same spot as the Fergal was murdered in the late 50s, which was a Shibadal spine woman. There's two things I'd like to put to you. I had two local guides. The first guy, not long graduated, and I said, "What are you doing on?" He said, "I'm up on the board." "Oh, what's happening there?" "Oh, a couple of raids, sir." "Oh, yes, I'm looking on." Tell me what the authorities would turn and find that out. And there were several conversations like this, so I sense there's a wind of change with that phrase happening. But yet the father of the second local guy, who's our local fixture, the local travel agent, has three daughters, all graduates, all out of Singapore, Seattle, Frankfurt. And he's brutal in his criticism of the army, saying that it's cancer on society, and he sees little hope. He thinks, unlike Bangladesh, which protests managed to topple the government, he can't see it happening there. So I wonder how you see that on.
I was wondering where the question was, but there we are. Good, excellent.
So, I mean, to me, the tragedy of Pakistan is its politicians. So I've been going to Pakistan since the late 80s. I still know the people running the country because it's basically the same people. They just switch back and forth. So, which is very convenient for me, but I cannot think of another country that in 35 or 38 years, it's still those same people that are running things. And young people are mostly not going into politics in Pakistan. They're often leaving the country. It's a country with very talented young people, but they don't see any future, as you were saying. And Pakistan, I mean, there's trending on Twitter at the moment, undeclared martial law, because a lot of people just feel that the army constantly run things, whether or not there's a civilian front, that it is actually the army pulling all the strings. And until they stop doing that, it's never really going to be a country that is looking at its long term properly and delivering to people, because these people are not answerable to anybody.
You're not allowed 2 goes. That's cheating. Until everyone else has asked the question. But anyway, go on then.
What can we do? I mean, the UK, of course, has very close relations with Pakistan. But you know, we turned a blind eye for a long while to what was going on there, because their feeling was that we needed their help after 9/11 in terms of dealing with terrorism, and because there's such a big community in this country, that we needed the help of Pakistan's intelligence for uncovering plots here too. So we didn't, I think, take the kind of stance that we should have done. You know, it's very hard what we can do now. I think people, actually, our senior military have very good relations with Pakistan's senior military, but whether they would actually listen to anybody is a good question.
Corbin shared rooms at Sandhurst, didn't they? Like Charles Guthrie did. Hilary.
Sorry, it's back to the Trump question.
Last Trump question, all right.
I love geopolitics, we're very ignorant of it, I wish I knew more. But I was in an airport last week and picked up American Vanity Fair with an article in there about Putin wanting Trump to be re-elected and talking about the Yalta Agreement post Second World War. And this is his big thing that he's talking about all the time. He wants to revisit it and recarve the country with Trump. How worrying is that?
Okay, Jane, that.
Yalta, of course, is Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. I worked quite a bit in Russia and made a film last year on the mutiny, the failed mutiny of Yevgeny Prigozhin against Putin. I don't know anything about whether or not there is a plan to carve it up now with Trump, but I can tell you that Putin is very fixated on the idea of Russia's empire as it existed, and of course, the Soviet Union. And this really was very much what propelled his action in Ukraine. And he gave a very important speech a couple of years ago that was basically ignored by the international community, in which he flagged very clearly that he was in the business of taking back land that historically belonged to the Russian Empire. And this definitely drives him. So that is going to be on his agenda. And as Fergal said earlier, you know, that this increases, I think, with Trump in the likelihood of an unfair settlement in Ukraine. So I don't know what we can do about that, but for sure, yes, when you look at Putin, you look at his history, and you look at what drives and motivates him, it is about the reestablishment of what he believes the Soviet Empire should be. And essentially the embarrassment and the lack of pride that happened when, you know, with the fall of the Soviet Union, and he wants to restore the glory days. And that is a very important motivating factor for Putin.
I mean, someone, I think it was Lavrov, when asked who are Putin's advisors, he said Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible, or Grozny, and Catherine the Great.
Yeah.
And I would just say one thing, which is kind of a perverse kind of hope. And that is, what is the thing that characterized the 4 years of the Trump presidency more than anything else? Utter chaos. And so when we tend to talk about dictatorship, we talk about fascism, you imagine, highly disciplined, highly organized cadres of people. That is not Donald Trump, and it is certainly not the people who surround him. Now, let's see who he brings into his cabinet. But his capacity for alienating people, even those closest to him, is unparalleled in modern leaders. So,
is alienating a word for killing? I mean,
not there yet.
Oh, okay.
But I think that is something which is that I remember at the end of it, so many Americans saying to me that I'm just exhausted by this chaos. And it was a pandemic, and no policy ever followed through. Ideas that fizzled brightly and then vanished. So let's see.
Yeah,
it might not be as
well. If he brings Kennedy in, the health secretary has been rumored. I mean, my God, the last panic will seem like nothing. compared to what will then happen. It's unbelievable. Oh God, we're talking about Batman again. Promised we wouldn't. Okay, so okay, let's switch on, move on to another thing. So Fergus, in your Fergal, oh, you Ferguson, didn't I? I do apologise. In your book, the Madness and Memoir of War, I mean, I think your very first line is something like, "Nobody made me do this," or "Nobody forced me to be a foreign correspondent," and you're saying that because you know, you're saying like, I knew what I was letting myself in for, and then you go into what you were letting yourself in for. And I mean, I do notice the title you begin is Madness, a Memoir of War, Fear and PTSD. And I have a walk-on part of 2 sentences in it, but I'm very grateful for it. Thank you. And I got a free copy. That's really good. But the PTSD then, which you've openly talked about, obviously, but you call it a madness. Now, there's a couple of psychiatrists in the audience here, myself. We don't normally use that word.
You don't.
No. No, I don't. And nor does
Because you're a
Walter.
psychiatrist.
Yes, because you're a psychiatrist. Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
well, exactly. Jane just said ordinary people do.
Yeah. Go
And
on.
I think
Go on.
so I wouldn't describe, obviously my entire career is not one of madness, but I look at some of the things that I did, my need to do them, reckless, unnecessary risks, and knowing again and again that I was harming myself psychologically doing it. I kept doing it. That was a form of madness to me, because it reflected this rampant inner turmoil, rampant, this impossibility of being still, of being happy, of being sure of myself, secure in myself. And if that wasn't madness, I don't know what it was. And no matter how much I drill into and I know, I mean, I have forensically dissected my childhood, my motivations, as I've spoken to you about. And even understanding all of that, when all the analysis has been done, there's a part of me that I know I need to keep on the leash. I really do, because it's waiting there. It's waiting there to carry me back into, I mean, it's what, 26 years since I've had a drink or a drug. I don't, I mean, I dip my toe on things by reporting on refugees and, you know, doing Gaza from a distance, but I'm not on the front lines. I haven't been for quite a few years. But it's all waiting for me, that chaos and that madness, if the moment I choose to kind of weaken and go back.
But you've been in Jerusalem for the last few months.
It's a hell of a lot different from being in Gaza, I can tell you that much.
Pretty civilized.
It is, yeah.
It's what, sorry?
It's very civilized
Pretty
compared to
civilized.
Gaza.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah, it's not the same
They're
thing.
surrounded by
And even
madness.
indeed being in Kiev, I mean, I spent a lot of time in 2014, 2015 in Eastern Ukraine, you know, on the front line of that war. It's a very different thing being in Kiev or in Lviv, you know.
And as any of the psychiatrists who you've seen, have they even said, Fergus, you just got, sorry, my best friend is called
You're not the
Fergus.
first person to do it, so don't worry. So,
I'll stop it.
it's a Celtic name anyway.
Yes, I get that bit, yeah. But they always said, look, you've got to stop this now, mate. You've just got to stop it. You need another job.
No, funnily enough.
I'm rather glad to hear that. Actually.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the really good therapists and psychiatrists try and point you in a direction you need to go.
Yeah.
Because, you know, nobody, you said to me once, nobody could have stopped me.
Yeah, I did say that. Yes,
Nobody could.
Yeah.
No, I was driven by a phenomenal will and ambition to be out there, to do what I wanted to do and be in those places. And people did. Psychiatrists didn't say it to me, but family members did. And I didn't listen. I wasn't capable of listening. And I caused damage because of that. Through, you know, my own driven need and selfishness. That's a fact. And I can't run away from it. And acknowledging that fact publicly is something that keeps me from doing the same thing again.
Does this resonate with either of the rest of the panel?
The need to be there.
Well, the need to be there, but also the darker places that Fergus is. Oh, bloody hell! I'm just going to. Mr. Keane.
Christina.
Yeah, I mean,
Talked about.
I think the thing that is very hard is coming back, right, from the places that it's all very well being there, being caught up in the story, but then you come back and it can be very difficult to engage with ordinary life back here. It's very hard to come back and hear people complaining about the train being late or something. And you've just been somewhere where people, you know, literally every day risking life just to step outside. So I do struggle with that quite a lot. But I think what made a difference for me is, so I'm a mother. And so when I came back, I mean, my son's now 25, but it meant that when I came back from it being places, I couldn't like go to bars and drink whatever or hang out with other war correspondents. I had to be mom because my husband had been doing all the parenting while I was away. So as soon as I came back, I went straight in sort of full on mum, taking my son to football practice, going to the school. It sort of felt like a double life sometimes, and sometimes the two things kind of strangely crashed into each other. I remember once in the years after 9/11, when people were looking for Osama, I had very good contact in Pakistan's military intelligence, ISI, and he was over in London, and he called me and said, I'm here, let's meet up. And it was my son's school bake sale that afternoon, and I had never been in the country for the bake sale. So I had absolutely promised to go with cakes to sell. So I said to this guy, yeah, I'd love to meet, but I cannot meet like after between 3 and 5. And he said, the only time I am free, it's like 3:30. I've got something really important to say to you. So I said, look, I really can't, can you not meet any other time? And then in the end, he said to me, well, what is it that you can't change? So I had to tell him that I was going to a school bake sale. And he said, don't worry, I'll come. So this guy, who was actually a really quite evil guy, came to my son's school bake sale in South London, bought £10 worth of cupcakes. So they were very happy, and discussed with me like what they were doing about Al-Qaeda in Pakistan.
I mean, there are
at
so
the
many
time.
safeguarding issues in that story. I can't even begin. Go on.
So generally, I tried to keep things very separate, and I've also tried very hard. I don't work all year for the Sunday Times because I feel like I don't want to just be running from one war to another. So I work, well, it used to be 7 months a year, now it's 8 months, to have some time to do other things. I also write books, which were always supposed to be about different things, not about the kind of wars, but actually in recent years that's sort of changed a bit.
Yes.
And I try very hard to always find bright spots to write about. So to write about hope in dark places, because I think people are exhausted by all the atrocities and things that are going on in the world and want to feel that there's something that they can do, or that somebody is doing something. And really the reason I'm still doing it above anything else is that in all these bad places, you do find remarkable people doing amazing things. And it actually gives you a strange kind of hope for humanity.
Jane, have you had those long
Yeah.
dark nights of the soul?
Yes, many long dark nights of the soul, and have suffered from, you know, issues, obviously basically PTSD from being in very difficult situations and seeing people, you know, dying alongside me. That is very, very difficult when something like that happens, as people in the military obviously know. But on the bright side, you know, I agree with Christina. I have 2 children, they're now in their 30s. And I've been doing this job a long, long time, but all the time that kind of grounded me. But coming home to my kids, I mean, I'm consumed with guilt as well, because I've not been a great mother. I appreciate that. I am probably the only mother who missed her son's first day at school. I wasn't able to take him. I was with the Oslo secret negotiators in Paris, locked in the Bristol hotel when the day came, and I knew I had to get home, and I couldn't leave, and I couldn't even say where I was. So I do feel terrible about it, but my kids assure me that they're okay. My son actually went into the army. My daughter didn't. And my son was the only 4-year-old who could relate all the warring parties in the Yugoslav conflict.
And I would say my son went into journalism
Really?
So-
and my daughter into filmmaking. So
God,
Is
they
it
really learned the lesson.
Is this the famous Daniel you wrote?
And they're happy, well-adjusted kids.
This is
Yeah,
probably the
and
most
I'm-
famous thing you ever wrote, I think, isn't it? Probably.
maybe
is.
they don't tell the truth.
They haven't forgiven me for it.
No, I bet he hasn't. Sorry.
So
go
maybe
on.
maybe they don't tell the truth when they say they're okay, but they seem okay. And yeah, so I think it was very grounding to have that to come back to all the time, being a mum. And as Christina said, my work, because I do long form TV, I'm doing half hours and 1 hours and big investigations. I don't tend to be on a treadmill like news people, constantly. I will do some big film and I'll be there for several weeks, but then I will come back and not do anything for a month or so, or try to, and I do try to do really boring, normal things as a sort of antidote to it. But yeah, I mean, over the years, I've had a lot of problems. But, as Fergal said, why am I still doing it? I have nobody but myself to blame. And I'm sure psychiatrists would say it's probably quite damaging. But the pull of it, the draw of it, the excitement of it is such that I'm still doing it after many, many decades.
Okay.
There's something comfortable about it, in my case, getting to 63. Okay. And at last being able to say, I'm okay with myself. Yes, I was an idiot in many respects in my life. No, it's true. But I'm okay now with myself. I know why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Okay.
And I'm okay with it.
One thing all of you mentioned, I mean, a lot of this, what you were saying there, will resonate with people who've been in the British Armed Forces and have deployed and come back. And I could see people nodding. You will have come across our armed forces. A lot of them are in this room. But when you meet them out on deployment, what's your general impression? I mean, correspondents give very different views of their relations with the military. Well, I mean, British, any military really, but let's stick with state active.
Yeah.
They are very different. I know they are. British would be better for stories, but whatever you want to say.
I mean, I think we've all been embedded with a lot of militaries, from the British, the American, Pakistan military.
Who do you prefer?
The Kurds. I mean, the British military are, there's a lot to be said for it. I spent a lot of time, in fact, went with British forces into Basra in 2003 on the front line with them. And it was an extraordinary experience. I find that the further you are away from the MOD, the better it is. Because when you're...
Oh dear, what's that building just?
Sorry, I know, in this building. But when you're with forces on the ground, the great thing about the British Army is people make decisions and they will make them. That doesn't happen in the American Army, by the way. It's very hidebound. It's very different when you're embedded with the US military to the UK military, in my experience. So someone will say, whoever's in charge on the ground, and it might not necessarily be a very high-ranking officer, they'll make a decision and it'll be based on reality, and they will let you do it or they won't let you do it. And usually it's the right decision. I think where the problems come for us is the attempts by MOD to censor and to control. And, when you're on an embed, you accept the rules and you sign up to the rules. You physically sign up to the rules in the Official Secrets Act and all that. So you are hidebound. But I have to say, by and large, my experiences working with the British forces, British military, have been very, very good.
Okay.
I think it's very interesting because it's kind of a clash of cultures. Like, journalists are opposite to military. We're very last minute, disorganized and impatient, whereas the military are very organized. Everything is,
I can see some laughter.
Okay. Well, compared to us, I don't know. So there always seems to be this kind of clash. But and I've being embedded with British forces, particularly in Helmand, I've had some very interesting times, but also, I've actually, the commander I was embedded with in Helmand in 2006, and we ended up ambushed by the Taliban and really had to flee for our lives. He ended up inviting me to his wedding, so I guess we got on quite well. But I feel very strongly about this attempt at censorship that Jane mentioned. We have to sign this thing called the Green Book because no other military makes us do that. So I don't know how aware you are, but every report that we do, we first have to get approved by the MOD. Now, if you're embedded with the Americans, that doesn't happen. They trust you to, you know, you'll be exposed sometimes to things where they say, you can't report that. And in general, we don't, because we want to be embedded again. So no, we also don't want to get shot.
Like troop positions, things that, you know,
Yeah.
clearly you wouldn't want to do that, you know, you need to be told.
But it's interesting because I tried to get a movement of media some years ago here to say that we won't accept this green book anymore. But it was really hard to get other people to do it because they didn't want to lose the embed. So I kind of ended up in the bad books of the MOD, and I didn't get embeds, but other people did not really support, which was frustrating.
Fergal?
I mean, I don't like embeds. It's not my kind of thing. I find it too restrictive, but I see it has a value.
But in some
that's horses
places,
for courses.
you have to do
Yeah.
it because there's no way.
Indeed, but as a, you know, it's my kind of preference is not to be embedded if I possibly can. And you get, I mean, it often depends on who you get, who the officer commanding is.
Yeah.
And if they're someone who is not afraid of the media, who hasn't been got at sufficiently by the MOD, and just has the confidence, you know, you meet an officer with confidence, you know it straight away. It's a thing nobody can give them. And if they, usually the more confident officers will be more flexible with you. That said, I have many really good friends in the military, and I'm thinking about, you spoke about camaraderie and the sort of things that we share. All right, now there's many, obviously hugely different things about the jobs we do. But that feeling of being together in danger does create bonds. And I'm thinking of all the people I've worked with, particularly from special forces, who have acted as our, you know, minders, bodyguards down the years, and kept us alive, you know, in really difficult situations.
Let me see how truthful the three of you are then. Because we did a study, we interviewed all the BBC, ITN and Reuters embeds after Tele 1, the invasion of Iraq. And we asked them what had been the most stressful thing. This is the embeds, okay? About them, some of them were military correspondents, but many weren't. What did they say as a group? There was about 120, I think, we interviewed. Probably you, I don't know if we interviewed you actually.
Probably, yeah,
No.
because I was on Tele 1.
Yeah, it was done through Ocky Health.
Yeah.
So what do you think was the number one thing that came out way ahead of anything else in terms of the bad bits? We asked them about good bits and bad bits. What was the worst bit about being an embed?
Over-reliance on safety, that they wouldn't let you do things because of responsibility for you.
Nope, that wasn't number one.
No.
The
The food.
Nope, no,
Food? No.
you're going down the wrong direction.
Was it being left behind when others were going on the embed and they told you what?
You're
would
getting
let you-
closer.
Yeah.
Well,
that would
we
be
wanted
really
to
bad.
call the paper, well, we weren't allowed to, fucking John Simpson,
Oh.
because that was the commonest comments.
You'd be surprised how many times I've heard that particular formulation.
We can all identify with that.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, so in other words, what you're referring to is a reporter that's embedded gets the exclusive and the other reporters don't. That's basically fucking John Simpson.
Yes.
Yeah.
We were.
That's very stressful.
In that case, if we're talking about 2003,
Yep.
his embed involved having a very large American bomb dropped on him, and his translator killed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's
It
not where
was.
you'd wanted to have been. They were freelancing. They were unilateral up in the north. Yeah.
Yeah, because I wasn't
they got going,
embedded
haven't they?
during, I wasn't embedded during that war. I was unilateral
Same.
because I was thinking
I was
like
embedded
you
in the
that I
South.
don't want to be embedded, I want to be free. But actually it was pretty difficult being unilateral because you didn't have information. You didn't know where the front line
That was scary.
was. And at one point we kind of,
Yeah.
I was in a car with a photographer. We ended up in front of the front line because
Yeah.
we didn't.
And sadly, Terry Lloyd,
Doc-
sadly,
Oh, yeah.
for ITV,
Yeah.
the ITN colleague died because he was exactly that. He was unilateral and he was
I was
stuck
on the
between-
same road. I was
stuck between the
actually
two
in-
lines.
in
and
front
most-
of him, and we told them
He
when
died.
we came back because I got
Yeah.
I kind of got scared because we were on the road to Basra, And so I'd only just recently joined the Sunday Times. So I was, you know, I suppose under pressure to show what I could do. And everything had kind of got messed up because I was supposed to be in the north and I'd been in Afghanistan. I went straight to Kuwait from there because suddenly our person who was supposed to be in Baghdad decided he didn't want to be there. So he pulled out. The reporter who was supposed to be in the south near Basra that went to Baghdad. So I was suddenly told to go to the south, but I had everything, all the kit to be in cold weather in the mountains. So I had like a kind of Arctic sleeping bag and things. And suddenly I was in this hot place. So when the war started, we crossed over and were on the road. So the first place that fell was Qasr. And when you crossed over from Kuwait, you could go kind of right to Qasr, straight ahead to Basra, or there was the road to Baghdad. And so my office literally called me. I was on just outside Basra on one of the bridges, and there was nothing. There was no people around. No sign of any forces. It felt wrong. And sometimes you can't explain things as a war correspondent, but you just know that something feels wrong. You have an instinct. So I said, this feels wrong. We need to go back. So I called my foreign editor and said, and I literally, this was like my first assignment for the paper. And I said, look, I'm going to head back to where we were before because there's nothing happening here. So he read me copy from, I think, Reuters saying that US jets were pounding the bridges of Basra, and also that one of the main battalions of the Iraqi army brigades had defected, all of which was untrue. I said to him, nobody is bombing the bridges. I'm at the bridges. And he said, are you sure you're in the right place? I was furious. It's like, this is the only road. So I said, I'm sorry, I'm turning back. So against what the paper said, I turned back. We saw Terry Lloyd and his crew coming on the way. So we stopped and spoke to them. And I said to them, I don't think that you should go ahead because there's no troops up there. And I think we're actually ahead of the front line. But they, I presume, were getting the same information from their office that I had been getting. So they carried on. And then you know what happened.
Indeed. Okay, let's take a second round of questions. So on this side, right to the back, gentleman there. Yep. Yeah, can we steal the mic? Just say that again. Sorry, you're right. Okay. All right. Yeah.
83 or 93.
No, sorry, 83. Sorry, I'm that old. So it was very much your reporters don't speak to them, keep them to one side. When I left the army in 2011, it's very much reporters are a valuable resource, almost seen as the forces we can use because of course, the information war and all the rest of it. So in my time, I saw that evolution from someone to be totally avoided to someone to be exploited. How do you kind of take that into consideration? We've talked about the embed versus working independently. How do you aim off for the fact that, well, we wanted to use you?
Well, speaking for myself, because again, having the luxury of not necessarily being on a news deadline like these two are, my philosophy was always do both. Embed, say thank you very much, leave and go back on the other side. And I always found that was the best way to really report the truth of what was happening, and very interesting as well, because you see it, I certainly did that in Afghanistan and I've done it in Iraq. So for me, that was the best way to counter that. And, you know, you talk about the Falklands. Well, Brian Hanrahan was famously, you know, I counted them in and I counted them out because you couldn't say how many. So this was when military censorship really began to be kind of honed for the television age, if you like. And yeah, we have changed a lot since then. But, you know, the MOD will still try to get its message through. And we know that. We're not stupid. I think we're all quite wise. And as I said, you know, do what you can, report it from the military standpoint, but get the hell out and try and report it from outside as well. That's what I always try to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a trade and it's the use of common sense. Jane mentioned about not giving away true positions. All of that why would you when you could draw incoming artillery on yourself?
Would be a bit dark.
It's just basic common sense. And it does, as I said before, often come down to the personalities that you're dealing with. And I think if I've learned anything with the passing of years, it is that the less obviously aggressive you are and the less arrogant you are, which in TV journalism is a lot of it about, or was. The age of the great monsters is over. But, you know, I think the more unobtrusive and, you know, not, I won't say easygoing, but kind of gently persuasive you are, I think it's a much better way of operating. Please.
Not sure I haven't. I mean, in terms of the military or MOD using journalists, I think that what you're referring to more is the Defence Correspondents Association. So there is a group of accredited journalists, defence correspondents, which I don't think any of us are part of. And so they have a more of a symbiotic relationship with the MOD because they're sort of dependent on them for access, so they may be less critical and easier to control than people like us. So it's probably harder for us to get embeds than for them.
All right. Okay, Hilary, you're sponsoring this, so we'll give you a second go. Only because you're sponsoring this.
Yeah, so I understand what you're talking about. I mean, it's almost like censorship. And when things go wrong since 1987, I have sued the Ministry of Defence time and time again, over and over again, thousands of times. And the stuff I've uncovered, especially from Iraq and Afghanistan, is truly shocking what has gone on. What they will do is, if I try and put anything in the press and publicise it, it's delisted. I don't know what D stands for actually, but it can never be reported.
It was
And
D
when
committee,
it's
wasn't it?
denotice, yeah. When it heads for a trial, which is obviously will make it in the public domain, they will come and settle the case, no matter how complex or awful it is, and they put a gagging order on me, so I can never speak about it. So I totally understand where you're coming from, because I'm as frustrated as hell that I'm not able to report
You could
it.
trust me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions we have? Yeah, lady there. Well, hang on a sec, wait for the mic. Yep.
Thank you. I was going to ask if any of you have any insights into conflicts that are less well covered in the media. So I spent a long time living in the DRC, working with internally displaced peoples, victims of sexual violence. And it's coming back into the UK afterwards. Literally an awful lot of people that had never heard of the country had no idea that this conflict was going on, the scale of it. And I just wonder if any of you have any insight into how and why some conflicts are so heavily covered in the media and others aren't. So.
The DRC war is sometimes called the Great African War because it's on the same scale as the First World War, but with the same number of casualties, but no one's ever heard of it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I have reported from there, and written also about this, obviously the sexual violence, because something that I write about a lot. But yeah, it's frustrating. You're right. We don't seem to have bandwidth, either our political leadership or the media, for more than one or two big conflicts. And I mean, Ukraine has sort of dropped out a lot because of the Middle East. I have a Ukrainian friend who messaged me last week saying, I feel like I used to be the favorite TV program and now nobody's interested anymore. And so, you know, and I can see why Ukraine, for example, should be of great interest to us because it affects us directly. Some of the other conflicts that are going on in the world that are not getting the same coverage, like Sudan, for example, you know, people, it doesn't have the same impact on us. But I try and cover all of these different things. I feel personally, I talked at the beginning about starting off in Afghanistan. I feel absolutely heartbroken at what has happened and is happening in Afghanistan. And I feel very concerned that, you know, 3.5 years now, or 3 years and a few months since the Taliban took over, and the outrage has kind of gone. And yet here is a country in 2024 where girls can't go to high school, women can't work, go to the gym, go to the park, even speak to each other in public. And, you know, where is that where is anybody talking about that? And it's getting very little coverage. So it's very difficult. I try very hard to go back to these places, but you know, I'm just one person. We don't really have the resources or even the space. I mean, the Sunday Times, we used to have a big team of people and we used to have 10 foreign pages. Now, most weeks we only have 2. So that's the difference in the kind of space that we have to cover things.
So I'm going to ask the panel, just each of you, what one last question is this, which is this, that this is a quote from you, Christina. You said that I think this is your book, or anyway, it's a quote from you. You said you received a WhatsApp group from Yazidi girls forced into sexual slavery by ISIS. And the quote you quoted, this lady then WhatsApped you and said, "We told you our story, but what difference did it make?" So just each of you, just give me one example of a difference that you've made as you look back over the time.
I can remember one.
Okay.
Because it was someone who pointed it out to me in the last couple of years. In Rwanda in 1994, I was in the town of Butari, and they'd killed something like 300,000 people in the Butari region in the previous 6 weeks. And an Italian aid worker had come on the scene with some trucks, and through incredible dedication and fearlessness managed to negotiate taking the orphans of many of the people who'd been killed out of the country. But to do it, he had to go through something, we had to go through something like 20 plus roadblocks. And every roadblock there was a, you know, militia with machetes, people who'd, you know, bloodied machetes, people who'd been killing nonstop. And he said, "Look, will you come? Will you go with us?" And, you know, part of me thought, this isn't so good. But the other part of me thought, wow, this would be amazing television. Okay. You know, and so I thought, okay, there's a moral cause here, and it's also great journalism. Let's do it. So we did it. I was sick with fear. And we eventually got through all of the roadblocks. And then many years later, I was contacted by a young woman in France who remembered and had survived the journey, and is living happily now in Bordeaux, and got in touch with me to say, you know, thank you for you and the rest of your team being there, because it helped us.
Well,
It didn't, you know, it was the aid workers who organized it and who saved their lives, but she felt that our presence had made a difference, and that meant the world, you know, hearing that. It really did.
Thank you. I mean, in 2006, when I was the first journalist to be embedded with the British combat troops in Afghanistan. And as I mentioned earlier, we got ambushed and we were really lucky to escape their lives. And it created a big thing here because it was the first time people really understood it was a war and not a reconstruction project. And so then there was questions in Parliament, and it led to there being more helicopters given and more help. So that's, I guess, made some difference. But the thing that, I mean, often it's the small things. So once I was coming back from Zimbabwe, and you always had to come through South Africa, and a South African friend said to me, "Oh, you've got like a day before your flight. Come and see this project that I've started." And he was an engineer, and he'd managed to find a way to convert circular motion into vertical motion. So he'd basically invented these water pumps, which were powered by children's roundabouts. And so as the children played on the roundabouts, the water was pumped. So I went to see this and thought, this is actually just the loveliest project, because the kids in these poor villages suddenly got a roundabout, but also it was saving the women hours from going and walking to get water. And they also used the water tower to put health messages. So it was like a total kind of win-win project. So I wrote a story about this, and a lady called Virginia read the story in Wales, and her son Lawrence had just died tragically of quite a rare disease, and she wanted to set something up in his name. So she saw this article and set up a charity called Lawrence's Wells, which has now put these wells in hundreds of villages in Africa. So that was nice.
Pretty good. Jane?
A long time ago, I went across the Sahara to Timbuktu, which is amazing, with ITN. And it was a time when the Ethiopian famine was dominating the headlines. So all the money was going to Ethiopia, but we understood there was this terrible famine happening in Mali. And we literally, 4 of us went in a Land Rover, was completely mad, that was driven across, matchless desert. There were no roads or anything. My cameraman got seriously ill with cholera. My sound man had to be dropped at a hospital and left. I then got a terrible thing called Johnson syndrome, where you have photosensitivity and you can't stand light, because I was given drugs to stave off the cholera. So 3 of the 4 of us were kind of almost incapacitated, but we kept going. We got to Timbuktu, we reported the famine, and we got the UN involved, and we managed to get various governments to start to give money to this part of Africa when everybody else was focused on the other part of Africa. So I was at a personal cost, it was enormous, but I was very, very pleased about that. And my best investigative effort was to identify a factory in Kazakhstan where the Iranians were secretly buying up enriched uranium. And to make this is back in the 90s, when people didn't realize that Iran was hell-bent on getting nuclear weapons, allegedly. And we made a program about this. We went to Kazakhstan. We got arrested by the KGB, but we exposed it. And a day after the program, the CIA sent in a secret plane in the middle of the night and scooped up all the enriched uranium from the factory and took it away. And I think we probably put back the Iranian nuclear program by a few years.
Yeah. What dull lives you do lead. So first, before we have a round of applause for the guests, which we certainly will, I need to remind you that after this there is some sandwiches and wine, etc. upstairs. Thank Hilary again for sponsoring it. And I want to leave you with it's not a quote from you, but you quote Saint Teresa of Avila in your book. And so this is a different one from her, but rather apposite for this morning. And this is Saint Teresa, and she says, "Let nothing disturb you, let nothing frighten you. Everything passes away except God." And she didn't ask, and Trump will as well. So, thank you to our amazing panel for what a great thing. Well done. Good. Copies of her book, so please get them, and I'm sure she'll sign them for you. So good. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. I'm just going to say a few words to finish this off.
All right.
To thank the panel. It's truly fascinating to hear about your work and your lives, and also the impact that your work has had on your lives. And I think everything that we've heard from you shows that the uncertainty that we face today actually isn't new. And there are stark figures in the King's College research, the most recent research that has come out around the impact of conflict on the armed forces. So from Afghanistan and Iraq, 11% of those who served have probable PTSD, and this rises to 18% for those who have fought in combat roles. So I just want to say as a final note, we need to ensure that combat stress is there for those who have fought in past conflicts. And we also need to ensure that it is there for those who are going to fight in the future conflicts that we are going to face. I'd like to thank everybody who supports us very, very much. If you do want to give more to combat stress, we would be delighted. And there is a QR code on the screen, but also our team will be around at lunch to talk to you about our work, and also to talk about donations if that was something that you wanted to do. And just to add my thanks to Simons, to Hilary Meredith for their sponsorship today. Very grateful for it, and looking forward to seeing you at lunch. Thank you.